Okay. Well, Matt,
It's okay. You can just ask me. Well, actually, let me just tell you real quick some of the things. So I never really explained Imago Dei and why that matters, why that was such a big part of my transformation. And why did I keep insisting that Christ is more than an example? I think that kind of comes back to, if there's no real resurrection, if there's no real cross and resurrection, then there's no real payment and no real, my faith is in vain, right? It doesn't, you can say so much about, oh, he's an example. That's great. Like, people accept that. But without it actually happening, it's really, for me, it's not worth it.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit and let's talk a little bit about your story. Because in the video, so first of all, you had this opportunity with Peterson. It was a Patreon opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you recording already?
Yep, I'm recording.
Okay, good.
So let's talk. Why don't you tell your story fairly well in that video for Peterson to get a chance to hear you. But why don't you give kind of a short version of it now? You were raised in a Christian home. You were in Germany, and so go a little bit into your crazy story.
Yeah. My dad was a pastor, and they planted a church in Germany. We're all Americans, but we left when I was 4, and so I grew up in a German school and didn't really speak English, just German public school, just like any other kid out there. And we lived there till I was 13. And then we came back to the States, and I went to high school in Fresno. And I went to UC Davis for undergrad and I needed a class, and it was like last minute, and I had signed up for African American Studies. And I was like, why not? It's interesting. I actually came with the express goal of destroying the Republican Party. That was my intent when I went to college. I was a political science major, and I was like all about that. That was my life. And then I switched to sociology because I felt like, it has much better arguments and it's just more forceful. And part of that was the question of race, which I felt like was super important. And so I actually ended up getting a major in African American Studies as well. And so I graduated with that, and I decided to go to graduate school at Temple University. And kind of my idea was secular academic work where you're trying to change the world with writing books about race and things like that. And that's kind of the world that I was in when it was a little crazy out there. So, the department at Temple the faculty was making really hostile remarks about Christianity. Not all the faculty, but the primary, the chair of the department. Okay. I don't know if it was the chair, but anyway, Molefia Sante, the one with the most influence there.
Okay.
And so for me, that really made me had to wrestle with, what do I really believe? Because you can't just sit there and be like, oh yeah, you're right. And everything I grew up with in Christianity is what does it really mean? And I was determined to have an honest response. I wasn't if I felt like the Bible was not real, and I wasn't going to lie to myself just to protect my identity as, I grew up as a Christian. I want to stay that way.
Yeah. Now let me see, Peterson, I know you a little bit better because you used to worship at a church just down the road here, a black church. That's right. And you're from Fresno, and you and I have had a few conversations, so I can play around with this a little bit more than Peterson could, because he just had that little window of talking to you. Yeah. Now, you were raised a Christian.
Yeah.
And so clearly your parents are Christians. They love Jesus. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's probably unfair to have you talk about them. When you went to UC Davis, on your mind that, your mission was to destroy the Republican Party, how did that connect with your Christianity for you then? How many years ago are we talking, by the way?
So that was in 2000. I graduated high school in 2000.
Okay, so you graduated high school in 2000. You're going to UC Davis, and you're at least an anti-Republican, and so you're going to go to UC Davis and get armed with all these ways to, destroy the Republican Party.
Yeah. Play the game of politics.
That was quite connected with your Christianity, was it, or was your Christianity kind of separate for you at that point?
No, I thought it was the moral thing to do.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't cheating on my Christianity. I felt it was very authentic.
Okay.
And my parents did too. My parents had a very similar perspective.
Okay. You should say your name at least, because I don't know if you.
Hi, I'm Matt.
Your name is
Matthew
Matt
Schellenberg.
Schellenberg, and you live in Fresno.
That's right.
And you and I got to know each other because you contacted me because you started watching my videos.
Pretty much. And
you called me, I don't know, it was a number of months ago, and then at one point you were passing through. We had lunch, and
yeah, it was great.
You haven't been able to make it up to the meetup. We'll see if you can do that. So that was the moral thing to do. Did you consider yourself a Christian when you went to UC Davis?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I never. Yeah. No. Absolutely.
Okay. And this attitude of destroying the Republican Party, this was for you kind of an expression of what a good Christian should do in your context, in your situation.
Yeah, I just felt that I just liked the positions better. I thought it was more moral. That's how I felt.
So then you graduate, you've got a African Studies degree, and you've got a sociology degree, and you go to Temple University. Where's that at?
Philadelphia.
Philly. What's the background of that school?
What do you mean, like the department or just the school in general?
No, the school itself. A lot of colleges come out of religious backgrounds?
Yes. Well, Temple was formerly a Baptist school. It was a night school. That's why they're called the Temple Owls. And so it kind of grew out of a religious thing, but it became a public school a couple decades ago. I don't know exactly when.
Okay.
But it is a public school in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so it's not
religious in any way.
No. So you went there to get a graduate degree in African American Studies?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you started taking classes there, you began hearing a lot of things that you interpreted as anti-Christian, and you still identified as a Christian.
Well, it's hard to misconstrue. I mean, it's their stance was pretty much, if it's the white man's religion.
Okay.
It's holding black people in bondage, and they need to be freed from that. So anything we can do to destroy it is good.
Okay. And so how did you feel about that when you were there?
I had felt that my Christianity was not in conflict with what I was trying to do. So, for me, the sociological problems that I saw, I felt it was my moral duty to kind of help resolve that. And, being a Christian, it's kind of like, yeah, you should work for that. And so I thought it was not consistent with what I felt, with what I believed. And I felt he was wrong on a lot. His attacks were just sloppy. Okay. They weren't. It was just hatred.
So now, when you were talking to Peterson, you very much expressed a conversion. I mean, that's the language you used, a conversion. Yes. But and so when I was listening to that, I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure if you've kind of shown Peterson how this worked, because I knew a little bit more of your story. Yeah. Talk about why you saw that as a conversion, and also some of the stuff you talked with Peterson. How did your life change?
Yeah. Well, he took it. I didn't really say that. He kind of said, he ascribed to me an atheistic background or something like. I didn't agree with that, but I let him continue.
Okay.
Because I didn't feel like I was. Certainly, you could say that the Marxist doctrine, all that. You could say, yeah, that's atheistic. That's what I was involved with. If you want to make that claim, so you can make a claim it was atheistic, but I didn't ascribe that to myself.
Okay.
And what was the other part?
But you did describe it as a pretty dramatic change in your life. And because Jesus was different for you. Jesus 2.0 was different from Jesus 1.0, at least with respect to the timeline of your life.
Because he was real. So the difference is abstract versus real.
Oh, okay.
And so for me, like, my Christianity was just the right thing to do. But when you're young and immature, you just take the world for granted. You're like, that's the right thing to do. I'm a Christian. And you haven't really wrestled with, is he real or not? Like, is that, are you just, what are you doing? Why are you a Christian? Like, do you believe? And I was like, yeah, sure, I believe, like, without questioning, without thinking, but after that, see, there's a lot I glossed over, a lot of wrestling, a lot of reading, a lot of praying, a lot of asking lots of questions about the Bible and its veracity and all kinds of stuff that I wrestled with for like that whole time I was out in Philly, and really tried to get to the bottom of it. And like I said, I was trying to be as honest with it as I could, and willing to take the conclusions wherever they went, including dumping Christianity wholesale if I felt that it was not correct.
Okay. And so what were some of the lines of demarcation? Now, you dropped out of your degree program at Temple.
That's
right. Obviously a pretty big
actually move. I was close to finishing. That's the
really?
Yes. Yeah, I only needed 4 more classes.
And you still dropped it?
I still dropped it because I felt it was so worthless to me.
Wow.
I was just like, what's the point? I'm not going to go back there. There's nothing there for me.
So that is a pretty dramatic turn in your life. I mean, to get that close to the end and then say, even just to finish the degree so you can, have a piece of paper and
have an amazing. Yeah.
And then you drop it. And what did you do when you left Temple?
I started looking for a seminary. So this summer, I was only there for 1 year. The master's program was actually very short. It's only 30 units.
Okay.
So, I finished 18, and I think I had another class in the summer, but I forget exactly. But anyway, it's only 12 units, 4 classes, 1 semester, not that far away. So I dropped out and I started taking classes. There was a seminary in town, a Mennonite seminary, and I took some non-matriculated classes and started researching different seminaries and where to go.
As I listen to you, I hear people, the missions people have in their life are almost always a direct reflection of their worldview. And so this change for you you were on track you wanted to be a public intellectual, what's now loosely called a social justice warrior. This was, you wanted to fight republicanism and racism. And I don't want to make this too political because this isn't really about political parties for you.
It's not.
Part of this.
I became completely non-political.
Yeah.
I was like, we don't change the world through politics.
Yeah. That's the real conversion in you, is the question of what is most important in this world.
Yeah.
And it wasn't before. What was most important was the political aspect, where we've got to make sure Democrats get elected and Republicans don't. And because I grew up in an African American community, and I've always voted with the Black community, which means I've always voted Democrat.
Right.
But I've always been suspicious of politics because I look around at the folks that I live around, and many of whom are Black, and I say, the government ain't going to save you, buddy. If you're waiting for Uncle Sam to wade in and make your life great, it's not going to happen in your lifetime. So, but for you, this was very much of a transition in terms of who you were and what you wanted to give your life to.
Yes.
So describe for me a little bit more about that transition. So it's one thing to look at this track you were on and say, this isn't it. It's another thing to look at another track and say, this is it. What made that change in your life?
That's complex. So what I said in the video was just seeing the power of it. And listening back to it, I realized, I wasn't very clear about that. It made it almost seem like I just read something. But what I was actually referring to was the people in the church that I was attending, and seeing people's lives changed, and so that was part of it, so I saw that there was power. And so when I went to school, like, they're all trying to change the world and they have no idea how. It's just, let's just have more education and that's going to help people and they should do this and that. And really, what do you know what's going to come of it? So they know every problem in the world, like every problem with racism, they know to the minutia. They know exactly everything that could be wrong. They figured that out, but solutions, they were hard to come by. And so when I realized, so what I said too in the video is God changes people one person at a time. God changes people, and by that, his power is displayed, right? In people's lives, they change from bad to good. And when I saw that, that was really big. I think that's part of it. The other part for me was just studying the Bible, and is there a supernatural element here? You know, is God really real? Or is it just a theoretical thing? Like, did people write this, or did God, you know, have his hand in this? So I just wanted to know if God was real for real. And you can't have a conversion without that. So when I really realized that was it, it's like the God of the universe who created everything, he loves me and he knows me. That just changed everything. It's like, I want to live for that.
Mm-hmm. So then the application of that, you saw that as being different from the type of world saving you were trying to do before. You were going to save the world through education, through waking people's consciousness, through anti-racism, through all of those things. And now you say, and I thought that was a stunning moment in the video when you told Peterson, you know, God saves one person at a time. You can almost hear Peterson's, you know, the sovereign individual, that theme that he has riding through that. So,
well, and Christianity is the solution for racism, right? So I was looking for the solution. It's not like I stopped caring about racism. It's just, I felt like, you know, kind of the conversion I had, like, I used to hate white people. I like really hated white people. Like, they annoyed me. I didn't want to be associated with them. I was picking up a lot of this attitude. And just one day realizing, like, God loves them. Like, why do I have such a problem? And that goes for everyone. It's not just, hey, stop hating white people.
Right.
My point is, God loves everyone. And he values us. He places a value on us. And so that, well, who am I to disagree with God? You know, so I'm going to value every human being too. That's the whole Imago Dei. We're made in the image of God. That gives us value. Now,
so you became a Christian. That was obviously before Jordan Peterson came on the scene.
Right.
What about Jordan Peterson? Why did he interest you? What about him caught your ear?
Yeah, there were a couple.
Let's back up a little bit. So you get back into the narrative. So you left Temple. You're done with that. You have, we won't call it a conversion experience going from atheism to Christianity, but your Christianity very much morphed, became very personal, became much more real to you.
Well, it's hard for me to say I was a Christian if I didn't really believe it was true.
Okay.
Because I really felt, because I was a real skeptic.
Yeah.
You know,
and I think that's what Peterson picked up on when you were talking to him. And so I think he understood you in that certain way. So, so then you dropped out of Temple. Then what did you do?
So like I said, I spent a year at home, just taking classes, just working and taking classes and looking for a seminary and doing the whole application process, and ended up going to Talbot.
Okay. And you completed your seminary degree?
I did.
Okay, so that one you finished.
Yes.
Good for you. So,
and that was way more. I had almost like 70 units just from the seminary.
You know, it is something, you know, to get a seminary degree like you and I have, to get a master's, those are heavy programs. You know, you're in class about as long as a PhD in many cases, and you get a master's at the end of it. So a lot of pastors get a little chagrined by that, but so be it.
And not only that, the grading scale is like A is only 100 to 94 or something. It's like,
my seminary,
the grading scale is really tough too.
So now also, so then you came across Jordan Peterson, and also with your conversation with him, the question of marriage came up. So let's come back to that a little later. But when did you first notice Jordan Peterson? What caught your ear, and how has that impacted your life?
So there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, his stuff runs the gamut. So, I liked a lot of the self-improvement stuff, and I think just taking on responsibility and how important that is. That really caught my eye. The stuff he was saying about Bill C-16 in Canada was very interesting to me, because I felt it pertained to religious freedom as well. So freedom of speech and freedom of religion for me are tied together.
Okay.
But then I think what really, really got me into it was his biblical lectures. And, sometimes I listened to him, like I cringed a little, I could disagree, but what he was doing was phenomenal, because I felt like he was making Christianity interesting to people who just really don't care about Christianity.
Yeah.
And because our culture, a lot of the atheists before, like, Christianity is pointless.
Yeah.
Like, let's throw away 2,000 years of massive, it's everything in our culture, literature, art. If you don't know Christianity, like, why would you throw that away? It's intellectually dishonest.
Right.
To just say, oh, it has no value. It's like, really? So I like that about him, because he kind of helped people understand that.
Okay. And so you actually, obviously, if you had Patreon time with him, you became a patron, and a pretty significant patron.
Well, that's the only way I could get to meet him. That was
so why did you want to talk to him so badly? I mean, you invested. I'm not gonna ask you for details, but we know at least the old regime by which a patron. You invested hundreds of dollars in the hopes of having a 30-minute conversation.
I really don't have a good answer. I just really thought I wanted to talk to him. And
so, was it worth it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, why?
It was a great conversation. It just showed me more about what he had to say. It opened up lines of communication.
Yeah.
And I just think that's really cool. I'm a fan, so yeah. Of course I want to talk to him. I want to send him some stuff, and maybe I can help him, think things through. Yeah, and talk about the Bible better. And right. I mean, obviously, he doesn't have a seminary education. He isn't. Right. I don't know exactly what Talbot equipped you to do, but my training is historical, grammatical, historical interpretation of the Bible. He obviously comes at the Bible from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. So what are the things? Well, so critique your conversation with him, and what would you like to have done differently, at least on your part? I thought it was an amazing conversation. I told you, I don't usually listen to videos when I'm at work, and it's usually when I'm washing dishes or driving or something, and often I'll put in a video, before I go to bed, and it was the end of the day, and I had turned your video basically into an MP3 so I could just listen to it on my. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to fall asleep, and I'll just pick up wherever I left off from Matt and hear the rest of it. But the video starts out slowly, and you're like, I'd kind of like to record this and put it up on YouTube. And he's like, no. And I got turned down pretty. And you say, well, you might change your mind at the end. And I'm thinking, like, no, it's like, not going to happen. No. And of course, complete switch, and by about halfway, 2/3 of the way through the video, I'm just kind of like, holy cow, this conversation is going some places that are really interesting for me. So I don't think I haven't seen any videos of him really engaging in that kind of stuff. Well, and like I said to you before, what really impressed me about it was, so hierarchies, to take a little bit of Jonathan Haidt and Jordan Peterson, put them together, hierarchies bind and blind. And so the Jordan Peterson, who is a University of Toronto professor, he's got a little world around him. He's on public TV, so he's kind of a public intellectual in Ontario, and people know who he is, but that's kind of small potatoes. And then obviously in the last 2 years, he's been on a status rocket. And, if you want to actually talk to Jordan Peterson, good luck, because there's a line of 1 million other people who want to talk to him. And he's been burned by this line a number of times. Right. And so maybe he was just trying to, protect himself by saying, no, don't. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, if I've been burned by all the people he's been burned by, and in New York Times and all of these places, take one little soundbite and Vice and just, I'd be very reticent to talk to anybody about anything with any camera going. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe at this point, maybe he's just gun shy, and rightfully so. But it's interesting in the video, because you get to a point and it's clear, he's just kind of, he's doing his,
he's doing his psychologist thing. He's listening. He's asking a few questions. At some point, he gets engaged, and then he's hooked, and then he's in. And it was just, and he was so, what amazed me is he was so open to listen. Open to hear you. And I thought
he didn't like argue with me, really.
No, not at all. He was practicing his point about you can learn something from pretty much anyone in front of you, and he really wanted to learn from you, and that's powerful.
His character.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. So I was like I said, I was just gonna listen to it, and Peterson will talk about all these things that I've heard him talk about many, many times. And it's like, well, you say this to him, and I'm thinking, I wonder what he's going to say about that. Then he goes here and he says, no, keep talking. And it was a real conversation to the end that he does flips. He says, yeah, you and Vanderklay can do what you want with this. Put it up on YouTube because this is a good conversation. And again, it's these kinds of things that continue to impress me about him. That's a level of honesty that is unusual.
Yeah. He took a sincere interest in what I had to say.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to, right? It's like, who am I?
No, he doesn't need you. In fact, if anything, you're a liability to him.
That's right.
And which again amazes me that he's still doing these conversations. And
he's not. So the part that got cut off from the recording is at the beginning. He said, "I don't do these anymore," and I started recording right after that.
Yeah, on my recording of him too, the beginning was just a total train wreck, and he had a bad internet connection, and I mean it was just a disaster, and I felt badly because I really wish I had the conversation with you that at the beginning said, I'd like to record this, and if it goes well, maybe publish it, but totally cool not to. I just wanted to, this internet thing is a weird thing, and this YouTube is a weird thing because, people come up to me like, oh, it's weird talking to you in person. It's like, yeah, but you know what? I put my pants on one leg at a time, and it's, we're all just human beings. We really are.
Yeah.
So what didn't you get around to that you'd like to say now?
There's a lot so I just felt like when I listened to it again afterwards, I was like, oh, I should have said that, and I never explained this part, and so I kind of felt bad about that, but I was like, I did the best I could in the moment, and maybe I can explain some things later. So I think one of the things we already touched on was like the image of God, because I kind of said, oh, that was really important to me, and I never really explained it. I think it's about the value that God places on us.
Yeah.
And it's like big whoop. Okay, God loves you. Great. I've heard it a million times. Who cares? But when you actually believe that God is real, and that he is who he says he is, then it means something. Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, God loves me? Wow. And so for me, that was the switch where I was kind of like, yeah, I know, God loves me. I've heard it a million times. To actually being like, that's God. He loves me. Yeah. It's very different when God is personal rather than, oh, this is the God of the Bible. This is theology, blah, 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 abstract. And so the switch for me was going from abstract to real.
Yeah. Well, and I think back on, falling in love with the woman that is my wife. You see someone and naturally in that process of infatuation, it's like they become, in the sense, an object of worship. And, as a young man, you might have this with, he's fawning after all these unattainable women. And then when it happens, when, she loves you and you love her, and it's like, bang, it's, there's few things like it. And I, when I read like the book of First Peter, when I first went through that book carefully, it was like, this book is all about status. And what Peter is saying is that, if the God of the universe loves you, anybody else's opinion of you, it's real. Yeah, you feel it. And it's that imago Dei. And it's interesting because that's one of the central things in Peterson's point. And so I went to he was in Sacramento, and actually all three other people from my meetup that went, one of them is training to be a marriage and family therapist. The other two have PhDs in psychology. And so we had our meetup the night after, and I talked to those two guys that were at the meetup, and all three of us had the same response, which was the most incredible thing about that evening was not what he said. It was how he worked a line of 160 people, and every single person that he talked to felt that, even if it was just for 30 seconds, they had all of his attention. And that was powerful. And that's what blows me away about these Patreon conversations. Because, you know, I talk to high status people sometimes, and like you said, they don't need us. Yeah. We're nothing.
Well, they're tired out too. They might have started that way, you know, but then after the 1,000th person, you're like, gosh.
That's right.
But yeah, I felt the same way because I met him in San Francisco at the, what was that called? The simulation.
Oh, the simulation. Yeah, I was there too.
Yes. Yeah. And I just caught him just briefly his attention at the end. And I wanted to tell him something. And he like turned to me and like leaned forward and was like, there's hundreds of people around him trying to get his attention. And he like made me feel like I was the only one he was talking to. And I was like, wow, he's a really good listener. And he really, that really meant a lot to me.
That is a powerful thing. I mean, people don't appreciate what a difficult and powerful thing that is. There's a lot of smart people, but that, you know, and because in this whole, you know, experience that I've had too, I worry about that because, you know, what's lovely about a small church is that I can do the Freddie and Paul show, and I know everybody there by their name, and I can spend time with people. That's the way people are supposed to be treated. But the more and more people come, all of the dynamics get different.
Yeah.
The video is
the
video
really
is slow, and it's making you slow. So I'm recording it on my end. You'll probably laugh when it's here. So.
Oh, well, you were slowing down for me too, but I think I caught it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to say? So what I'm kind of thinking of is that I'll take this and I'll put this as the front end where we talk about it, and then we'll put your conversation with him on the back end. And I was blown away. I was seriously, this, you know, there's all these little videos on the internet about, you know, and you won't believe what happens next. Well, I didn't believe what happened in that talk.
Yeah, and there's some specifics we should probably talk about and tease out too.
Okay. Yeah, I've got about 15 minutes.
I think some of the things I didn't talk about was, oh, you got 15 minutes? Okay. Like we didn't finish talking about like trusts parents with a lot, you know, and then some parents abuse that.
Yeah.
And my point was kind of like that doesn't absolve the parent from the responsibility, and they're going to be held accountable for what they do. Yeah. And so what unaddressed is really the end of like what's the problem of evil, but that's a whole nother we can talk for hours on that.
Well, what struck me was and this is, I mean, in some ways, this is one of the, how to describe it. So I heard him get to a point where, okay, so here's the big question. Does God save us? You know, salvation by grace alone? Or do we save ourselves by fulfilling the law? And, you know, so and that's where he kind of wanted to engage. And he basically is saying, I haven't worked that out. And it's kind of like, yeah, you and, you know, we're still fighting over the Protestant Reformation. And where do we and God, how to talk about agency in this world? And of course, Calvinists have, you know, predestination and election. And
his major hang-up, I'm sorry, it's video stuff. If people are, why is he interrupting him? It's
it's the lag.
But he had this hang-up about like, if you're saved, like he said redemption, but why the heck would you do anything? You know, like it's kind of like once saved, always saved. So like, hey, you can do whatever you want, right? And that was a real hang up for him because he's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's completely illogical.
Yeah. He's
And
exactly
so,
right.
and that's what we teased out, right? That
Yeah.
was what was so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing that, and again, I was just blown away by how open he was and how honest he was with you. And then at the end he says, yeah, do whatever you want with this. This was a good conversation. Gracious. I'm thinking, this dude really believes what he believes. Again, I hear a lot of people, he's a fake, he's a phony. I've seen a lot of fakes and phonies. No, this dude believes what he believes.
Yeah. And I think he thinks we can actually accomplish some good. So I think he actually felt good about it. And I think he learned something.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm speechless. I just was amazed. I mean, because you talked to me, you said, "Oh, it went great," and I thought, "Well, okay, we'll see." And then and then I'm listening to it. I'm thinking, "Gosh, wow, that's something."
What did you think about the virginity cloth thing? Like, it was a weird way to answer the question, I thought.
I had never, there's a lot of different ways that Christians and pastors try to talk about the relationship between blood and atonement. And I've been doing all these videos lately about sacrifice and blood. And then the virginity cloth, it's like, wow, is that going to get some comments?
Yeah. I did not go into this conversation thinking like, how can I tell them everything about Christianity? I didn't even know we'd be talking about this. And certainly I didn't think I'd be telling that story. I did not think that. Because you told me, write some things down that you're going to say. And that was not on the list. Okay, that was...
When you went there, I thought, well, if dropping out of temple didn't, completely destroy his social justice warrior cred, this virginity cloth is just gonna nuke it.
But I really like the story because it's so revolting, right? Because it's the most barbaric thing we can think of in our society. Right? It's like the worst possible thing. Is like this, you do this virginity, you have to keep it pure. If not, you're going to be stoned. Like, that's the most barbaric thing. But it highlights, and it's like, exactly. That's what God thinks too.
I had never heard it before.
Right? And so he's like, well, God's like, I don't want that either. That's why I came and died.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the atheists that listen, they might have turned off by now, but that's why we'll put this at the beginning and we'll just keep teasing the Peterson video, and at some point it'll start in this video. But I listened to that and I thought, I didn't know before, if Matt asked me to post this, should I post this? After I listened to it, I thought, I hope he wants to post it, because this adds something to the Jordan Peterson story. Mm-hmm. It adds something, because so many of us have been listening to so much of his stuff, and everyone's just waiting for something new. Explored territory, unexplored territory. Two hemispheres of the brain, all this stuff, and then this happens, and it's like, doggone it. Isn't it fun when stuff surprises you? Yeah.
No, it was really fun. I'm really happy about everything.
So what's next for you, Matt? Now you're getting married.
That was part of the video, right? So everyone knows now.
Video. You were pretty transparent in that video, so I just want to make sure.
I really thought it was going to be private. I didn't go into the thinking like, oh yeah, like people are going to hear this. I just really kind of I was like, forget that. I'll just be private. I'll just be personal.
You've got the dour, you've got the impending marriage and the dour view of.
You wouldn't believe how many people tell me that. It's like, oh, you're getting married? I'm really sorry. That's like what I hear most of the time. And I think that's sad, but.
Have you ever read Tim Keller's book on marriage?
Probably. No. Not that one.
It's a good book. It's a good book. Because one of the things I appreciate about Americans assume marriage is supposed to make you happy, which is why they divorce.
Right.
Marriage isn't supposed to make you happy. Marriage is supposed to make you godly.
Right.
Well, how do we get godly? We get godly through suffering and sacrifice.
Yeah.
And
it's the two irons sharpening each other, right? It's
that's right.
like,
That's right.
you don't get that. What's great is when you're married to someone who is mature and just wise and gracious and a person of good character, because they're looking out for your best good too.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to beat you over the head with it. You know, you're both trying to grow, and I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Well, it is. It is. And marriage has the capacity to test you like nothing else. And again, this was one of the early things when I started watching Peterson. The way he spoke about marriage, I thought, doggone it, this guy, so often, especially even among psychologists and therapists, it's like a lot of therapy winds up being, well, my job as a therapist is to make you happy. And a lot of pastoring is, my job as a pastor is to make you happy. And no, that's not right. And so when he talked about marriage often, I thought, this is one of the few secular psychologists that talked about marriage in a way I could respect.
Yeah.
So crazy thing. Crazy thing. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jordan Peterson in the long term, because he sure turned a lot of our worlds upside down.
Yeah.
And
I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. So
in the end, I'm not, God's not a respecter of persons.
That's right.
And I don't want to elevate him too much. I mean, I'm grateful for what obviously he's done a great thing, and I love a lot of the stuff he's done.
Well, I like Jonathan Peugeot's take, which is Cyrus, because Cyrus was a pagan emperor of the Persian Empire, and if you read the prophet Isaiah, he's called the servant of the Lord. Well, Israel is called the servant of the Lord, and those servant of the Lord passages are the ones we trot out at Advent to refer to Jesus. So Christians are sometimes a little too, oh boy, I always, how much more trouble can I get into? Christians are always a little too tribal. They're just a little too peculiar about some things. And God does what he wants. God uses who he wants. And God runs history towards whatever end he wants. And
It's very Calvinist of you.
It's very Calvinist of me. Well, Matt, I'm going to pause the recording here just so we can chat a little bit before I have my next appointment. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
This is wild.
I was just maybe going to put some of it up on YouTube, if that's fine with you. I mean,
yeah, I think I'd rather that I didn't go up on YouTube.
Oh,
I think.
Okay.
If that's okay.
All right. So that's fine. Unless you change your mind later.
No, I think we should just keep it as a private discussion.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, can I share it with Paul Vanderklay?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you know who he is? You remember him?
I do.
Good.
I absolutely. Yes, that's no problem.
I've had an opportunity to meet with him and to talk with him, and I went to Sacramento, and I live not too far away, so he and I got to talking, and he's I don't know if you've seen some of his videos, but he's getting more and more subscribers, and kind of taking the.
Yeah, how's he doing? How's his channel doing?
It's growing a lot. Like he started off with just like a few hundred subscribers now, and then a couple of months ago it's like 2,000, and he's like, wow, my church only has 50 people, and I got 2,000 people online, and it's like now it's like almost 10,000, I think. So it's growing. It's growing.
Yeah, well, it's very exciting. Well, he's starting to have a real conversation. So tell me his name again.
Paul Vanderklay.
Paul Vanderklay. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I some of his stuff is really interesting. Like he has a take on it that I haven't heard elsewhere, and you can tell he's been trained on like philosophy and theology and really insightful stuff. Yeah, and he says hi.
Yeah. Well, I met him.
Yeah, you said you were at SAC the other week.
That's right. And so that was good. Yeah. And I see that he's. Yes, he's talking right now about the Sam Harris, some of my Sam Harris discussions.
Yeah, yeah. He's if you want to get a good feedback, I think he's a good place to go on kind of like adjudicating your performance and just in general how it went. I'm getting married this fall. I'm getting married in October, and I think when I was younger, before I was like, marriage and family, that's a huge responsibility. I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah.
Now it's like marriage and family is a huge responsibility. That's awesome. I want to do that.
Great.
So
that's a huge difference in orientation.
it is.
I'd be more than happy to hear about it because you bring a very particular perspective to this issue, and so you have some things to say about it that I probably couldn't hear from anyone else.
That's true.
What was the guilt about, and where do you think it stemmed from?
I think it was kind of like I felt associated with all the people that had done horrible things in the past, and that by my white skin I was associated with them and culpable. And when I first heard that, I was in tears. I was just like, but I've only ever wanted to help people. How could I be guilty of such things, right? And so that guilt really overtook me in trying to make things right. Like when I heard that people don't like me because I'm white, I try to do everything in my power to prove them wrong. Like I'm a good guy. I'm not like them. I understand, and I'm a virtuous person. And just
well, look, obviously there's some things about that you might think are laudable, right? I mean, there isn't anything wrong with trying to be a good person.
Right.
And even more, there is some utility in taking on, well, that's the question. The question is what is your moral responsibility to what occurred in the past?
Yeah.
And the answer isn't, well, you have none. Mm-hmm. So that's not so simple either. But to be guilty, I think that the error comes when you're guilty on behalf of your race. Yeah. Maybe you should be guilty on behalf of your humanity.
Right.
That's the original sin doctrine. Maybe that's part of the reason why that doctrine was so useful. It's like, well, yeah, you're corrupt and flawed.
Yeah.
But it doesn't come, in some sense, if everyone accepts it, it doesn't come as a surprise. And it's also not parceled out more for some people than others.
Yeah. Went to graduate school at Temple University in Philadelphia in African American Studies. And that particular department was extremely radical and also very anti-Christian. So for myself,
why was that? Did they? That's interesting because it doesn't seem to me that it's credible that Christianity as such was an enemy of American blacks.
Absolutely, you are correct. And there are other departments that will take a completely different stance.
I see. What was it like? Well, first of all, you must have been a minority, racially speaking, in those departments. What was it like to take the sociology degree and the African American Studies degrees? And what did it do for and to you?
I've thought about this a lot, and I've come a long ways. Let me start with kind of my experience in the department. There's some people that just flat out don't like you. Doesn't matter how woke you are. It doesn't matter your woke points, how much you've proved yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't, none of that stuff matters. You're white.
Probably makes it worse.
End of story. Pardon?
I think with people like that who are prepared to dislike you a priori, being nice to them is actually the worst strategy.
Yeah.
I don't think it helps at all. Yeah. Which is quite interesting because you'd think that, well, it's easy to think that the proper way to befriend someone is to be friendly to them.
Right.
But that's true for most people, but not all.
That's right. So, this story is also really just a part of growing up. I mean, it's learning to have self-confidence. It's learning to believe in yourself and not, please it's If I don't do X, Y, and Z, they won't like me. They won't accept me. I have to do X, Y, and Z. And, that's a huge part of it. That's just me maturing lately in that facet, I think,
Yes. Have you tried a personality test?
I have not. But
It might be interesting to try the Understand Myself personality test and see how high in agreeableness you are.
Oh, I'm sure I was sky high before, but
yeah, well, but it seems that way. Yeah, it seems that way, and that has some. We found that the best predictor of politically correct, or a great predictor of politically correct belief, was in fact trait agreeableness, even though it doesn't predict political liberalism very well.
Yeah. I think just as a side note, I had a great counselor a couple years ago who really helped me sort through a lot of these things, and really helped me to advocate for myself and really, believe in myself, being able to say no to people and X, Y, and Z. And I think that really helped me a lot. But back to the story.
And what did that do to you? Yeah, back to the story.
Well, just being there, there are some people obviously that they're nice. They're nice people. They want to be friends. They don't care. You're obviously at the department, so you're not racist against black people. Like, there's a reason why you're here. So there were some really nice people there that I befriended. But for me, it was kind of like, well, of course they don't like me. I'm white. Like that's totally okay and that's normal and fine. Because white people have done all these things. It's okay if I suffer a little bit. After all, I deserve it.
Right.
And so that was my mentality. I was not offended by it. I was just like, they don't like me. I'll just tread easily. I won't offend them, and just kind of go my own way. So that's kind of how I cope with that. Never really thinking that they're pathological. Just just accepting their behavior as justified.
Yes. Well, especially given your guilt.
Yeah. So the thing that really snapped me out of it was actually becoming a Christian. And actually, if I back up, it was actually the attacks on Christianity that were leveled in class that kind of became a diatribe against Christianity. So my parents were missionaries, obviously, so my dad was a pastor, so I was invested in my faith, but I'd say there's a lot of things I hadn't worked through or really made my own. And it kind of challenged me to wrestle with that more. Because if I'm having these charges leveled at me, it was kind of like I was determined to research that. I was determined to figure that out. And so thankfully I was going to a great church in Philadelphia at the time. They really explained the Bible really well. I just kind of saw, I just dropped out. I saw that I felt like there was more power in what I was hearing from the Bible, like people being changed by people being evil and bad, becoming Christians and turning from their evil. I was like, that's way more powerful than this stuff that they're saying at school. And
so why do you think that struck you as more powerful? Because it's not obvious, right? You had committed yourself in some sense to a doctrine of group identity and political activism, right? And you'd stake a lot of your life on that. And then you experienced the religious your exposure to the religious doctrine. What did it do? It convinced you that there was a different pathway. What was it?
First of all, I think the biggest thing, going back to the group identity thing, the Imago Dei, the image of God, that was hugely important for me. So, first of all, I think it was a matter of just my skepticism, like a lot of my questions being answered. So for me, it was a big part of it was apologetics, and realize like the veracity of the Bible, questions that I had and things like that, I felt intellectually were answered. But I think the real change for me as a result was kind of like when I was home that summer. I hadn't dropped out yet. But
how old were you when this was happening?
23 23.
Okay.
I hadn't dropped out yet. I came home to Fresno for the summer, and when I was at church, and I think like everyone up on stage was white, and my old self was kind of like, oh, this is bad, this is not acceptable. And then I was thinking, but wait a second, God loves these people. Well, am I smarter than God? Wait a second, if he likes them, why don't I like them? God doesn't seem to be afraid of being associated with them, so it's realizing like,
why do you think you felt that was a reasonable thing to think? I mean, because you said you had been approaching this previously from an agnostic or atheistic perspective, and then all of a sudden you had these ideas.
Yes.
Why did you give them any credibility?
Well, because I believed the Bible. I mean, I believed what it said. I became a Christian. And it's...
That must have been a shock.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my life is totally different. But, that's... For me, it was just a matter of fidelity. It was a matter of taking the consequences seriously and making proper conclusions.
So what do you think Christianity offered you morally and practically, conceptually perhaps as well, that you weren't being offered in your political/academic pursuits?
I realized that God reconciled people to himself one person at a time. And that my old approach simply wasn't realistic, simply wasn't proper. I felt that God's way of doing was effective because of what I saw around me, but also what I saw in myself and the drastic changes in my life.
And what were those?
Well, dropping out and just totally rearranging my value system. Deciding, I want to go into ministry. I want to be a pastor. Forget all this secular stuff. Like, I felt like I could change the world by writing books, and race-based stuff, which ironically my cohort member is doing right now and is like getting super famous. But that could have been me. I could have been that guy, but never mind.
Do you have regrets about that?
No, absolutely not. No, but
and so how is so another question that relates to what we were talking about at the beginning. You talked about your upcoming marriage. Could say impending marriage, but I'll say upcoming.
Impending.
And
impending doom.
Yeah, exactly. But you said you reconfigured your attitude from man, that's a lot of responsibility, oh no, to man, that's a lot of responsibility, oh good.
Right.
And to what degree, if any, is that transformation associated with this movement away from the identity politics and towards Christianity, or am I asking too much of a leading question there?
No, you're right on. I have an answer for you. I thought about. So if you know the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, right? God enters pain voluntarily, okay? And it's not just the pain of the cross.
Is that like a definition of God?
I think he's more than that, but it's certainly one thing he does.
Well, it's really an interesting statement, man, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to enter pain and suffering voluntarily.
Absolutely.
If that's a big deal, and that's a big part of the motif of the crucifixion and the passion. Right. It's the adoption of pain and suffering voluntarily.
There you go.
And that's a really redemptive act,
Absolutely.
weirdly enough.
And so that's where I you see God doing that, and not just the pain of the cross. I think also the pain of rejection that God suffers from his children. And he's like, well, regardless of that, it's worth it. Why is it worth it? How is that? That's not obvious. Well, you're perfect, God. You're fine. You're chilling. You're doing great. No, you're not missing anything. You're not lonely. Why would you enter this suffering, this pain, voluntarily? Just the pain of the cross and the pain of rejection, which I believe is greater than a parent who is rejected by their child. There's no reason to believe that. I think God feels it even stronger. Why would God do that? So for me, that was like, well,
do you suppose it has something to do? I mean, there's an idea that God is whatever is perfect, but I kind of wonder if whatever is perfect isn't something static. I wonder if whatever is perfect is something that's in search of a even more perfect perfection. So the perfection isn't in a static state, it's in a state of continual transformation.
Yeah.
And maybe God has a destiny in that sense.
I have some comments on that. I want to
Okay.
finish what I had to say real
Yes.
quick, and then I'll come back to that if I can remember.
Okay.
Because now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
No worries. It has
We're
to.
talking about God adopting suffering and pain voluntarily and why he would do that.
Right. So for me, that was inspiring. Right. That was kind of like, because I'm thinking, is it worth it?
Maybe
Can I
that's
handle
why.
it? So I'm like, well, I see the example of what Christ did, and I'm like, it's worth it. So he believes the love is worth it, right? The love that he gets, the love from those that do accept him is worth the rejection of those who don't.
Yeah,
and,
that's a good idea, man.
yeah. So,
Well, it's so funny. It's so I could see a human parallel in that in my personal experience.
mhm.
I've had a lot of trouble with critical press people in particular,
Sure.
and people have asked me in some sense why bother with it, I guess.
Yeah.
And part of it is that the positive consequences, like from my lectures, for example,
Right.
the public lectures are so absolutely overwhelming that
Yeah.
they more than fully justify the trouble that is involved in doing this.
Bingo.
So,
That's parenting too, right? I mean, that's,
yes.
you're like, oh, this is going to be trouble. This is going to be, you have this thing and all this, I'm going to have to deal with this. And there's this huge responsibility, and you're like, well, it's worth it for me. I will endeavor that despite the drawback.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that's also what you do. Well, this is relevant to your marriage,
Yes.
right? Because that's also what you think, God, this is going to be a lot of pain and suffering. It's like, yeah, but no, it's not only is that, it's not exactly that that's justified by the totality of it, but that in some sense it's intrinsic to the process by which that desirable totality comes about.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like the idea of example. Like I hadn't thought about that. I mean, it clicked in right away, because obviously part of the idea, the Christian idea, that God became incarnate to suffer through the entire catastrophe of human existence was to do that as the ultimate example.
Yes, it's more than that, but it is that.
Yes, it's more. And okay, so when you say it's more than that, what are you thinking about? I'm not disputing that, but I'm
Sure.
curious as to what you think.
Well, I mean, there has to be a payment for sin, and ultimately that is what the crucifixion accomplishes.
Well, that's something I have more difficult time on. Like, I think this is why the Eastern Orthodox types like me, because I've never been comfortable. It might be my own ignorance. I've never been comfortable with that part of the doctrine, the idea of the payment for sin, because I don't understand it. So, man, explain away.
How much time do you have? I want to make this short, but tell me honestly.
I can tell you. Give me a sec here. We have 11 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll make this short.
Okay, well, I'm all ears, man.
Do you know what a virginity cloth is?
No.
Okay, so in ancient Israelite wedding practices, when the marriage was consummated, the couple had to produce a virginity cloth after the consummation. So the virginity cloth proved that the bride was a virgin at the.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, I know, yeah.
Right. Okay. So and this is relevant to your Exodus lectures and all that too, because the Bible keeps talking about blood purifying. The priest has to sprinkle blood on this and that, and you have to put blood on this and that and the other, and put it on the doorposts and and everything else. It's like, why is there this concept of blood purifying? Well, imagine that the bride is found not to be a virgin, she doesn't have the blood, whatever. She is then stoned to death. She, as the shame the pain, the bitterness. She's killed in front of her friends and family. It's horrible. It's the worst thing you can imagine, right? It's absolutely barbaric. So where does this come in? Well, in order to prove purity, she needs blood, right? In order to prove purity, she needs blood. Well, if the bride cannot produce her own blood, the groom will take some of his blood and shed it as a substitute in order to provide her cover, in order to provide her purity, right? So the bride is without purity, but the groom provides the purity by giving his blood as a sacrifice in order to make her pure and respectable and clean.
Okay, so I have a question about that. Is that actually what happened anthropologically? So do you suppose there were multiple episodes where there was no virginity cloth blood because the bride wasn't a virgin, but the husband loved her enough to do exactly that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't done enough. I know that this was a ritual. So yeah, the anthropological stuff is correct. But the Christian principle is that then, so we are, the church is known as the bride of Christ. And so as Christians, we acknowledge that we are sinful people, right? We are not pure. And judged by the eyes of God, if he judged our lives, he would say, wrong, bad. So what do? Well, Christ is the groom who shed his blood on our behalf so that we can be presented as pure and spotless, right? So as the groom, he sheds his blood. That provides us with purity. We're presentable in the most literal sense of the word. We're presentable to God as pure and holy because we accept the sacrifice of Christ. Right, so he shed his blood because he knew that we didn't have it, and he didn't want us to suffer. Right, he didn't want us to suffer that ignominy, the stoning, the death, the hell.
Okay, so let me ask you a question about that. Yeah. So it's late in the day, and so this is pushing me.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine. I'm just hoping that I can get the conceptualization right.
Yeah.
It seems to me that to accept that sacrifice and to be redeemed by it, you have to act out its consequences. So it's like you already said that, or you claimed and accepted perhaps the idea that God's incarnation in Christ was exemplary.
That's part of it, yes.
He teaches you how to behave. It's part of it. Well, isn't the reconciliation and atonement a consequence of the pathway that opens up because that exemplar can now be embodied? Like it seems in Western Christianity in particular, there's this polarity. It's like you have this moral obligation to imitate Christ, well, to believe in him, but to imitate him. Those are different things conceptually, because belief might be the statement of the creed, but the imitation is in action.
Yeah, well, beliefs, if they're sincere, result in action.
Yes, and actions should be
right. I mean, what you believe shapes what you do.
Yes, it does. It hypothetically, at least, if you actually believe it, it shapes what you do.
Right.
If you don't just say it.
Right.
Okay, so if Christ's sacrifice redeemed people for all time, why is the imitation of Christ necessary?
Well, because part of what he does is he is the true man. He shows us what true humanity is. And so, so this is a big part of what I had to figure out when
I'm also not trying to trap you. I just don't understand.
I'm good.
Okay.
When I was in graduate school, when I was doing that stuff with African American studies, I was trying to find a way to live pure, to be respectable, to have morality, right? What's the morality? What morality should I follow? How can I absolve myself of guilt? How can I be a good moral person? What is it I have to do as a white person? That's how I felt and thought. Right? And so Christ basically says, I am the moral authority. I am the example of how you should be. Imitate me, And so if you see Christ and his value system as true and perfect, then, and if you believe that, then, well, that's, how should I act? Well, what does Christ believe? What is his worldview? How does he treat people, et cetera, et cetera? What's his morality? And that is, he proved his perfect morality, and his perfection. So therefore, how else should I live if I take it seriously?
Well, look, I'm absolutely not. I'm with you completely there. But I just have this one sticking point,
Sure.
which is, I buy the idea that you have a moral obligation to do that.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is, if you're already redeemed
Yeah.
by the sacrifice,
Yeah.
then why do you have the moral obligation? Because it just doesn't. It's not logically. I'm also not saying
because
that.
If you didn't, you'd be a hypocrite. I mean, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's totally the way to go. But
so what if you're a hypocrite? You're like.
No, but then you're not really redeemed, because then you didn't really get it. You didn't really understand it. Your value system was never changed. It's not. You did not truly accept the sacrifice.
So that's okay. I see. So you're basically making an internal consistency argument. So that's what they call. Partly that's the philosophical claim of no performative contradictions. Right? You have to bring your action in accordance with your belief.
Well, yeah, but I'm not perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that you can. Otherwise, you're lying somewhere. You might be lying in your action or your belief, but you're lying somewhere.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I went like completely the other way, it's like, I don't think he meant what he said.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's kind of like a marriage, right? Like you said you were gonna marry me and love me, but all you do is sleep around with other people. Well, that kind of proves that you didn't really take it seriously.
Yes, and that there's no marriage.
Right. Exactly.
Despite what you said.
And it is a marriage. That's exactly the idea.
See, I also had this strange idea. I don't know what you think about this. I'm sure it's not original, but I thought it could also be that Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, let's say, redeemed humanity for all time, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to do the work.
Oh, yes. So this is a big part of Genesis and Exodus. God wants us. He wants us to be in charge. He wants, like, you guys do it. You administer justice. Here's what you do. I'm counting on you guys to fulfill those responsibilities, because God trusts humans with a lot. God trusts government and humans to kind of take care of a lot of those things. And it's just like parenting, okay? It's just like parenting. God trusts parents to take care of kids. That's a huge responsibility. Why would he do that? And clearly, oftentimes, it fails. But that doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility, or that your shortcomings are not, Well,
then that is another question too, because and a profound question, because as you said, it fails a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of Ivan Karamazov's objection to Alyosha's belief in God. He said, well, you see parents torturing a child.
Yeah.
What does that say about the goodness of God? Which is a perfectly reasonable criticism.
Right.
And so the first question might be, well, why would God allow such a thing? And it has something to do with autonomy, but then that begs the other next question, which is, well, why is autonomy important? And then the next question might be, well, why are people important even?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Why in the world would God want to be involved even?
Yeah, it's parenting. It's God loves us. We're his children. I mean, that's at the fundamental level. Yeah, I was going to say something else.
Seems like a very strange thing for God to do.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not going to judge it.
So I think that's what's amazing about, like, why would he? That's the whole thing about suffering and entering suffering. It's kind of like, why would you do that? Why would you enter into that? What are you getting out of this? I mean, we're not that great. We're not that good looking. We're not that smart. We're not that wonderful. We're actually kind of nasty sometimes.
But it is something to be loved by your children.
Yeah, exactly. And God does get that,
Well, look, that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what. You and Vanderklay can decide what to do with this video.
Okay, what do you mean?
Do whatever you want with it. It was a good conversation.
Okay.
If you think that it can be put to positive use,
Okay.
you can put it to positive use in whatever way you see fit.
Oh, thank you. So you did change your mind.
It's a good conversation. I think it might be helpful to people. So you can figure out what to do with it.
One quick, I never did get to talk about the Exodus stuff. Is there, can I send you a video or send you a paper or something?
Send me a paper.
You prefer that
Or
to a video?
Yeah, probably. Send both.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Thank you very much.
good to meet you.
Likewise.
Say hi to Paul for me.
I'll do that.
Wish him well.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
okay. Bye.